what's up you guys? This is Rob from The Gay Guy Plays, and today on the Crossfire, we're not talking about reworks, but we are asking, what's so wrong with Limbo and Oberon? Now, in addition to Hydroid, reworking these two was the most requested topic of the bunch. However, Elurdin was the closest to hitting the nail on the head when they stated, many people want a rework, just not many suggest how it should be done. And while that is not 100% true, because let's face it, everyone has an opinion, and there are way too many chefs in the kitchen trying to get their ingredients into the pot. After looking over things a bit closer, I'd rephrase that as, many people want a rework, however, not many suggest why it should be done. So before we even talk about tweaking abilities or giving them new ones, we need to understand why a decent number of us do not find them satisfying the play. Because let's face it, we can't solve a problem unless we know what the problem is and why it exists. So I'm gonna make a quick request. Do not leave a comment on the video without watching the entire thing. Because I'm trying to have a very specific conversation and I'm not afraid to let the sass monster in me come out and start gobbling up comments that don't further it. Now at their cores, they are two very different frames, and honestly that is the sole reason why I'm covering this topic. On one end of the spectrum, we've got Oberon with a mechanically complex skill set that covers almost all bases, from damage to CC to healing and even status immunity and armor buffs. He is the epitome of being a jack of all trades. Now sliding all the way over to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, Limbo literally has the same ability iterated 3 times. A single target banished, a self banished, and an AoE banished, as well as the ability that allows you to deal more damage to anything that you banished. So crystallizing that down, we've got one frame that apparently is too general and one frame that is apparently too specialized. Now I say apparently because I personally like both frames, and while I definitely think that there could be some tweaks made to each of their kits, I appreciate the fact that we have such a large spectrum of specialization within the frames. So let's start with Oberon. This guy is just doing a lot. I remember scripting for his rundown and legitimately each ability had so many things going on it was ridiculous. His number 1 on its own inflicted damage as well as radiation and a knockdown, which would split into multiple enemy seeking orbs after making contact with the initial target that had their own range and dealt a different amount of damage with the potential to inflict radiation and puncture. And remember, that is just his first ability. I had to explain the benefits and drawbacks to duration on renewal as well as the different effects that occurred if you killed or didn't kill an enemy with Reckoning. Now with this complexity comes the ability to adapt to most situations. While it's a pain for me to explain the details of his skill set for a video, Oberon can be taken on almost all mission types and find a use. The only place he really seems to struggle is during escalating missions, where group compositions require the interaction of certain mechanics in order to ease the difficulty. So for a frame that is literally useful almost everywhere, my question is, does being generalized hurt him? And if you think it does, which direction do you think he should be shifted in? More defensive? More offensive? And how would this make him different from the current frames already on the roster? Because last time I checked, aside from Equinox, which is literally 2 frames in 1, he is the only frame that can do everything that he does. And prepare yourself, because the little sass monster in me is creeping out for this final statement, so don't take any offense. He just wants to play devil's advocate. Or is Oberon pretty much just fine in his current state, and he just has some very vocal fans out there that want him to be the best at something so that they can feel better about maining him? Shifting gears, we drive over to the hyper-specialized end of the spectrum when we take a look at Limbo. I actually had to pick him up recently just to get a feel for him again, and honestly, I kind of love him. However, I do feel that his theme is a bit harder for people to conceptualize than others. Originally, he was pitched as a space magician or wizard, which sounds really cool, but is a bit inaccurate since he doesn't walk around nuking things to death. Instead, I prefer to think of him as a space mathematician, which sounds a lot less cooler, but if you think about it, he subtracts himself from the battlefield and creates a new plane to fight on. He can add allies and enemies onto that plane, he can divide the current battlefield by using Cataclysm, and he can multiply the damage you do whilst you're in the Rift. So when I use him, I think of him as the divide and conquer frame. Who do I want to fight, and how many enemies can I take on at once, etc, etc. Now, clearly, mathematics doesn't necessarily make for extremely fast gameplay, but that is the trade-off you get for literally being invincible and being able to decide your own fights. So in this case, we've got a frame that is insanely specialized due to being tied to a very unique mechanic. So the question here is being that specialized bad? And if it is, what's so bad about it? Trinity has 3 abilities that focus on restoration with 1 defensive skill. Nyx has 3 abilities that focus on battlefield control with 1 defensive skill. Why is Limbo not as embraced as the previous 2? Is it because non-Limbo players find the Rift mechanic too difficult to wrap their heads around mid-battle? Or is the Rift just fine and it happens to be his ability that lack interesting interactions with the Rift? Now, the sass monster is going to come out one more time, so brace yourselves. Or Or is Limbo overall just fine and the players who lack the skill to use him or comprehend his mechanics that are the real issue? So before I close this out, there are a couple things I want you to keep in mind before you start commenting. First off, and I'm going to be completely blunt with this, I do not under any circumstances want you to try and rework these frames. In fact, if you try, I will just straight up delete your shit. I don't want to see a list of abilities and how you think you can improve them. The focus of the discussion is solely about pinpointing what the issue is. What do these frames lack? Why do you think people aren't enjoying them as much as other comparable frames? In fact, I want you to think of your favorite frame and why it is that you enjoy playing that frame so much, and put them up against Oberon and Limbo just to see where you feel these two fall short. I want to know what you think the problem is and why it's a problem. In addition, I want to make it very clear that while we have been covering reworks, the last thing that I want for the Crossfire is to become the "let's rework everything" series. This is meant to be a place to hash out a variety of topics like events, updates, weapons, issues with the community, and occasionally reworks as well. We chat respectfully in the comments and then I crystallize the overarching response. So don't hesitate to suggest topics that aren't reworks, because I've already got the next Crossfire subject ready to go and it's gonna be a fun one. So thank you all for watching this edition of the Crossfire. I am very interested in seeing what you think is wrong with these two frames. Now, if you haven't checked out the previous episodes, I'm gonna go ahead and link them both in playlist form, as well as the hint list of my top 3 alternative builds. Now, don't forget to do all the things that I ask you to do at the end of every one of these, and as always, love somebody, hurt nobody, and touch your body. I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye! And dear Lord, sweet baby Jesus, if another person suggests making an exalted anything, I'm going to lose my shit. We already have an exalted sword, we have an exalted staff, we have an exalted bow, we have exalted claws, we have exalted pistols, we even have an exalted arcwing. It's not creative, leave it alone. Unless you're talking about giving Limbo an exalted cane, I don't really want to hear it, okay?